leaders, executives, thinkers, ladies and gentlemen of all generations. I'm delighted to be with you here today in the 6th edition of FII. I'm always excited to be FFI and FII to the extent that I never missed a virgin. I'm especially excited about this one here. And I'm honored to be invited for the second time to speak about this important topic. Perhaps they chose me because of my age, and they think that I've seen so many generations in the workplace that I know one thing or two about talking about or working with different generations. This topic reminds me of a recent conversation that I had with a friend who was also a relative, which means that I know him from a long time and we grew up together. The father talked to me. He was extremely worried about his son. He told me, you know, my son, you know him from a young age. He was young and restless. Now, he's beyond his 20s, well into his 30s. He's not young anymore, but he's still restless. He jumps from stint to stint, project to project, with no stability in mind. Ironically, I also know the son who comes to me for mentorship. The son authored 4 books, done 2 startups, and now is well into his 3rd startup, and is having very good traction. To me, this story is another example of the gap between the generations. But let me ask you a question here. Do you think the year that you were born really defines the way you behave, the way you think, your value and work style, your values and work style? Or in other words, does the generation to which you belong really define you? There is definitely a gap here. And as we have seen from the video, the gap is there's like an older camp which is characterized as conservative, controlling, even to the point we heard it, cruel. Then we have the newer camp of the young who are positive, progressive, and people-oriented. Is that a clash of generations? I tend to disagree with the characterization of it as a clash of generations for 2 reasons. The first reason, I see it a bit disrespectful of this older generation of whom we are the products and to whom we go for wisdom, their experience, and knowledge. But more importantly, this narrative of clash of generations boxes you in a box that you are part of a generation, you need to think a certain way and act a certain way just because you're part of this or that generation. To me, it's more of a clash of mindsets, a clash of work styles. In Saudi Arabia in particular, we are embarking on a very ambitious journey to Vision 2030 with its 3 pillars. We're doing it in a world that is fast changing and very complex. We have just came out of the pandemic, Corona, do you all remember? Then we have global conflict, and now we have economic difficulties. And this complex backdrop, we are here to transform our future. To do that, at the Mohammed bin Salman Foundation, Misk, we studied very deeply the leadership traits needed for the leaders of the future. The reason we're doing it is because we are on a mission, on a journey, to create the leaders of the future that would lead us to Vision 2030. It's part of our mandate to empower talented Saudi youth. As our study came out with a competency model or a leadership model that identifies the traits of the leaders of the future. I don't have time now to go through the 7 competencies. You could download the whole study from the paper on our website. It's in the link in my Twitter page, in my speaker profile. But I'll take you through an example. A competency, by the way, is just a complex word for sets of behaviors, values, personal attributes, skills that a person or leader need to adhere to or live up to. One of those competencies, and arguably the most important one, is being a principled leader. That competency does not dictate a set way of action, but actually gives you two polarities or a spectrum of work styles or behaviors to choose from depending on the situation. Some of it part of what we characterize as the old camp, some of it part of the new camp. And you're free to choose whatever matches the situation. Let me give you two examples of that competency. One is being risk-averse on the one side, conservative. On the other side, being reckless and a risk-taker. And you are to choose as a leader where to be and what is benefit or matches the situation. Another example of that is being charitable versus being economically sustainable. And another competency is being a force for the future. And there you can have behaviors to select from the polarities of being very slow and conservative all the way to being fast and entrepreneurial. Or being respectful and bound by tradition and social hierarchy to being socially experimenting. These competencies and the importance of them and the applicability change depending on the situation, as I said. For example, during the COVID pandemic, priorities changed. The whole world order changed. We have done a study at the Misk Foundation on post-pandemic leadership and found that being a principled leader, for example, remained as the most important competency before, during, and after the pandemic. However, being people-centric, and that included looking at the health and well-being of people, shot all the way to being one of the top during the pandemic and after. The competency model and prescribing to leaders how to work is one side. Another area that we're focusing on is dialogue. And that's what we're doing today, and me opening the session on multi-generational dialogue. We will continue this dialogue in this same hall in 2 weeks at the Misk Global Forum. But what we're discussing is a continuation of what we're saying here today, is that the generations need to talk to each other. There's no one right or wrong way. We need to learn from each other. And there are a common goal that we need to reach. There's a transformation. There's a very ambitious transformation that's ahead of us. And we need to select among old and new work styles that benefits the situation. Going back to the story, to the father, I told him at the end that at this day and age, what worked for us is not necessarily the best for our children. There are many ways of success these days. And don't worry about your son. I see him well set on the way to success. But also the son, I told him that you need to be respectful of your father's fears, but you also need to learn from your father's wisdom and plan well for your financial security. And to all of you here with me today, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or like me, in your 50s, or even older or younger, I say that you are free to choose to which generation do you belong in terms of your work style. I actually invite you to be part of what we call at Misk as the generation transformation, the generation that will lead transformation in this country, or what we call Generation T. Thank you very much.